Welcome to How to Write a Speech. In this video, you'll be given some advice on how to organize your speech, how to plan for speech topics, and some general suggestions for writing a speech. So let's begin. First off, before you can write a speech, you have to come up with the speech topics. So up here we have a little circle map of speech topics. There's some criteria you want to think about when thinking of speech topics for this class and just for other classes as well. First thing you want to consider is, what is the purpose of the speech? Is the purpose to inform? Is it to persuade? Is it to demonstrate? Each speech has a unique purpose, so you want to make sure you're meeting the expectations for that. Next thing you want to consider is the occasion. Are you speaking at a wedding, a funeral, a party, bar mitzvah, quinceanera, wherever it might be? You need to adapt your topic based off the situation or occasion that you are attending. Next is the audience. That's an important part, is you want to make sure you think of topics that will appeal to your audience. If you're speaking to a group of your peers versus a group of parents, grandparents, teachers, whomever you're speaking to, you want to make sure your topic will appeal to them. Otherwise, they're going to tune you out before you even have a chance to start speaking. We'll discuss later on in a later lesson about different types of audiences. Next thing you want to consider is your experience or background. What is something unique that you know how to do? Do you have special skills? Are you, for example, I give a lot of times for the demonstration speech, I have students who are very good with their hands at building things. I had a student who converted a Furby, those little creatures that are popular about a decade ago, into an alarm clock. If you have special skills like that, please bring them to the table. They will make you a better speaker, but also will give you kind of a confidence in what you're doing, but also will help the audience to believe what you're saying as well, because they know you have first-hand experience with your topic. Another thing you like to consider is the expectations for the speech. Is it supposed to be a certain time requirement? And what is it supposed to be? Again, goes kind of the purpose. Is it supposed to persuade? Is it supposed to motivate? Whatever the purpose is, whatever the expectations are, you make sure you're meeting those expectations. If your speech is supposed to last 3 to 5 minutes and you last 30 seconds or 15 minutes, you have not met the expectations of the assignment, and a lot of times we'll get deducted for it. But also the audience is either, number one, if you go too short, not be able to understand what you're getting at, but also number two, are going to be bored in tears if you go too long. The last thing you want to consider, probably one of the most important things, is your interest. Talk about something you care about, because if you care about it, we're more likely to care about it. We've all had teachers who talk, you can tell, are just going through the motions of what they're teaching. If you're passionate about your subject, even if it's maybe not a very exciting subject, your audience is more likely to pay attention than if you're just going through, like I said before, the motions of it. So pick something you do with you're trying to think of a topic, think about something in your free time that's legal and moral, but also think about something that you enjoy doing, that you're passionate about. Because if you're passionate about it, that passion will show through when you're speaking. If you don't care about it, that will show through as well, and that makes for a very negative situation while you're presenting. Now that we've come up with speech topics, let's go ahead and talk about actually how to organize the actual speech itself. Here's a basic speech formula. We a lot of times compare a speech to a hamburger. If you notice a hamburger, there's 3 parts to it. There's a top bun, the middle, the meat, and its fillings, and the bottom bun. The top and bottom bun hold the burger together the same way that introduction and a conclusion hold the speech together. Also, you notice if you think about a hamburger, both buns are very similar to each other, but not exactly the same. The top bun is a little bit different than the bottom bun. The same thing can be said of your speech. Your introduction and conclusion should use the same ingredients, but maybe put them in a different order and have a little bit variety to it. There are 3 parts of the speech: introduction, body, conclusion. The first part to talk about is the introduction. Just some advice for introduction. It should be no more than 10 to 20% of your overall speech, meaning if your speech is supposed to last 3 minutes and you have a 2-minute intro, that's way too long. You want to keep it short, but also kind of grab our attention during it. It's obviously the beginning of your speech, so it's where you grab your audience. So you need to start off strong. My advice to you is, if you're struggling writing your introduction while we do speeches in this class, is to feel free to go ahead and skip to the next section, the body section, and then come back to the introduction. Many writers get bogged down right in the introduction, and they don't actually get the rest of the content done in time. Also, if your goal in your introduction is to relate the information to yourself, to give you some credibility while you're speaking, and also to your audience, so they actually care about what you're talking about. In addition, it sets a tone for the rest of your speech. If your speech is going to be serious, silly, somber, whatever the mood of your speech is going to be, you kind of establish that during the introduction. So there's 4 parts of your introduction. The first part is called a hook, or an attention-getting device. There's all sorts of different types of hooks. The ones I kind of talked about in this class a lot is, the first one's questions. Questions are the most common one. They are, example questions could be interrogative, where you expect a response, or rhetorical, where you don't expect a response. The problem is there's always at least one person in every class who will respond to a rhetorical question. An example of a rhetorical question is your mom asking you how many times that she told you to take out the trash, and you respond 50, and she smacks you upside the head because you're being obnoxious. Questions are most common types of hooks we use in this class. However, a lot of times the questions I get are very lame, such as, how many of you ever made a sandwich before? Or how many of you know how to breathe? Or things like that. Those questions aren't really hooks, even though you're asking a question. So you'll make sure you're asking a hard-hitting question. In addition to it, make sure you're giving the audience a chance to respond to it if it's supposed to be a response question, like interrogative, or if it's rhetorical, give them some processing time to actually think about what they're doing. The next one's anecdotes. Anecdotes are short personal stories. Those usually kind of give you a sense of experience with the topic, and a lot of times they're funny, but they don't have to be. But again, it gives you credibility, where if I, as a 35-year-old male teacher, was talking about the perils of being a teenage girl, I wouldn't have credibility. But in the past, I have had a student, for example, who did a speech about AIDS, and in her speech, she mentioned how her grandfather had passed away from AIDS. So she had firsthand experience with it and gave her credibility. You can also have famous quotes, and a lot of people assume that quotes have to be boring quotes from history. They can be quotes that relate to your audience. So think about music quotes, music lyrics, quotes from a TV show that's common amongst your peers, movies that are out right now. Things like that will get your audience to buy into it, or at least listen at the very beginning because they know that quote and they recognize it. Jokes and humor you're also welcome to use. The thing you want to be careful of, number one, is that you don't offend people. And number two, if your joke's not funny. If your joke's not funny, and the very first words out of your mouth is your hook, and your joke bombs, that makes for an awkward rest of the speech. And trust me, I've had students do this before. So if you're not naturally a funny person, this is not a good place to experiment with it. So if you are funny, by all means, use that as one of your skills, but if you're not, I would stay clear from it. Bold statements where you say, for example, if you look around the classroom, by the year 2015, 50% of you will be dying of AIDS. Now that's actually a statistic as well. If you have a fact like that, you can use something like that that will help grab your audience's attention. Just make sure it's a real fact. Otherwise, your audience won't believe you anymore. You can also use visual aids. You can make a reference to something that happened in class previously. There's all sorts of different ways you can grab our attention, but please have something to grab our attention. Otherwise, the audience is going to check out from the very beginning. Next thing is called the link. The link is simple. It's hard to explain. The best way to say it is it connects the hook to your thesis. It makes your speech flow. It also might be where you connect your audience and yourself to the topic. The best way to say it is if you don't have a link, then your outline or your speech won't make as much sense. So please have a link of some sort. We'll explain that more in detail later on. Next thing is the thesis statement. For many students who are writers, the thesis statement is the hardest part for them to write. It's a beatdown. In this class, though, it's fairly simplistic. Simply, your thesis is the main idea for your speech. This is where you establish your point of argument if you're trying to persuade us to do something, or persuade why something's better, one alternative is better than the other. It should cover the whole speech. The question you should ask yourself is, what purpose am I to achieve with this speech? The answer should be your thesis. So for example, this first speech, the how-to speech, their goal is to simply teach us how to do something. So you want to reword it more carefully than that, but that's the goal ultimately for it. Last part of introduction is called the preview of main points. Well, first of all, here's an example thesis there. It says, today I'm going to tell you about ... That's not a great thesis, but that's a general idea for it. So eventually we want to get away from using first person like that, but that's something that will come with time. The last part of your introduction is called preview main points. In preview main points, you're simply kind of show us what we're going to be learning during the speech. It's also called a roadmap of your speech. You basically it leads into the body. You tell your audience what to listen for. And it's usually one sentence that gives an overview of the major areas of your speech. You talk about what you have at Roman numerals 2, 3, and 4, and that will make a little bit more sense later on. So basically, you're talking about typically you have 3 main points. You're talking about your 3 main points briefly in the introduction. Let us know what to listen for. Next section is the body of the speech. Oh, and here's a sample introduction you can read at your own leisure. Well, I'll read it to you actually. I'll be the first to admit I am pretty lazy. The most exercise I get is when I pick up the remote control to switch channels, push the buttons on the phone to order my pizza, or when I have to get up to answer the door to get my pizza. Lately I've been noticing that I get winded doing these activities. I just don't seem to have any energy. That is why I'm going to show you how to exercise so that you can increase your energy level. I will show you the proper clothes to wear, some leg and stomach exercises, and finally how to cool down. This thing where it says I'll be first to admit I am pretty lazy, that's the hook. Then when it further elaborates on it, that is the thinking statement. And then next is the thesis, which is, this is why I'm going to show you how to exercise so you can increase your energy level. If you notice a link, it can be multiple sentences long. And then last sentence here, I will show you the proper clothes to wear, some leg and stomach exercises, and finally how to cool down is your preview main points. The next section of your speech is called your body. This is the biggest part of it. This is the meat of your speech. It's where you try to prove your point. It's where you state your main ideas and supporting details. You usually have 3 main points, but sometimes you can have more, sometimes less. But typically in this class, you'll have 3. And ideally, you try to give equal time to all, but that's not always a reality. So sometimes you have to change the format up a little bit. It just kind of depends each speech. And this is where you give support information for your speech and supporting details. You have facts, things of that nature. The last section is your conclusion. Your conclusion is the shortest part of your speech. It's the bottom bun, which usually is the smallest part of your hamburger. It should be no more than 5 to 10% of your speech. It's simply a wrap-up of your speech. You want to let the audience know that you're ending, because if they're reading the paper, they don't have the visual clue that you're winding down. Whereas you're speaking, you have to let them know that you're wrapping up your speech. So if they have a paper in front of them, they can see there's no more words on the paper, so they know you're wrapping up, versus the spoken word, we don't have that luxury. So you want to give us some verbal hint. You can say things in conclusion, finally, to wrap up, to sum up. I know some of your English teachers don't like that, but for sake of this class, that works fine. And typically, you don't want to add new information during the conclusion. You simply want to wrap up what you've had previously. So what's the parts of those? There's 3 parts of the conclusion. Restate your main points, restate your thesis, and final thoughts. So restate main points, you're simply restating main points again. You're restating your thesis in a slightly different manner. And your final thought is, think of like last words you want to get out there. They're action steps, so if you want them to take action to recycle or to help encourage people to not text and drive, whatever you're trying to convince us to do, this way gives them action steps on how to complete that task. You also give them incentive for remembering your speech. Maybe this topic will be a matter of life and death sometime. Maybe it'll help us save a life, whatever. Also maybe have emotional impact. And one way to wrap up your speech, an easy way to go is you may want to refer back to your hook, whereas if you started with a question, you may refer back to that question. If you start with a story, make a reference back to that story. It just makes your speech kind of go a nice, neat little circle. Okay, that's the basic components of a speech. Next lesson we'll talk about is the components of an outline, which is a little bit different than a speech. We'll talk about that in a separate lesson. So till then, we'll see you later. Oh, and here's your sample conclusion. Now you know what to wear, some different exercises, and how to relax after exercising. Exercising can make you more energetic. So now the next time you need to change a channel, you'll have the energy to go to the TV and do it yourself. That's a conclusion from that early introduction. You notice it's worded a little bit differently than the introduction, a little bit shorter, but has the same ideas. And it kind of makes your speech go in a nice, neat little circle. So that is a typical speech. Like I said before, we'll finish do outlining in a different level, at a different time. Thank you.